Check, check, check. Excellent, actually. Thank you so much.
All right, we just got organized real time. I'm so thrilled to see that we have overflow for such an important meeting. And it's a good thing we have the fire marshal here that does making sure we're compliant. And if there's folks outside and in the hallway, we can have them sent in or brought in. It's all clear for now. Okay, I'm Liz Arona. I am one of the city council members for the city of Solvang and one of the co-hosts for this fire meeting. And I want to thank you all really sincerely for coming out for such an important topic and becoming more aware, becoming more informed, and becoming, most importantly, more prepared for wildfire preparedness. And we have a list of a really great roster of speakers. I'm going to ask Joan Hartman, who's also a co-host, to introduce those folks in a moment. And also my other co-host I wanted to introduce, which is David Silva, the mayor of Buellton, who will have, in a minute here, have a few words to say about why this is such an important topic for the city of Buellton and his community. So first of all, just want to also give you a backdrop why this may be intuitive and obvious why we created this meeting, but there was a bigger conversation that was going around while we were getting very keenly aware of fire preparedness after the LA fires. It's not that all of us weren't already conscious and thinking about these things. In City of Solvang, for example, is already preparing our CWPP and trying to get grant money and abatement programs in place. But it occurred to me, and I went to see Joan in her office, and they were already thinking about these things. It's really important for our intercommunities, all of our cities and CSDs, to be coordinated in getting our communities prepared and ready and planning our responses for, like you do for insurance, the worst possible scenarios. But coordinating is something important in the Valley as we think about true fire abatement. Our cities are so interconnected and tightly bounded, but most importantly, when you think about evacuation plans and emergency response, we're tightly bound to the city of Solvang. We're tightly bound to the cities of San Ynez and Los Olivos, and also the county of Santa Barbara. And most importantly, we can't forget the Chumash tribe, who have their own fire department. All constituents are represented here. So I wanted to point out who's here and who actually played an active role getting the community involved and reaching out to our constituents and putting the program together for tonight. So from the city of Solvang, let me point out first my council members and colleagues, Mark Infante and Louise Smith, our city staff and manager, Randy Murphy and Olivia Uribe, and Mayor Brown from the city of Solvang. I'll let our colleagues introduce their peers as well. But first, let me just say one last thing before I introduce Dave and get on with the expert speakers. The importance of fire preparedness, fire safety, fire abatement is really, it's a responsibility for the jurisdictions in which you live and reside, but it's also going to be most effective when we all work together and private citizens in the community at large participate in these programs, activate your plans, become informed and get educated on the things that we can all be doing. And importantly, you'll probably hear today, pay attention to what your neighbors are doing and where they are and what they might need in the case of an emergency. So again, thank you for coming today. Hopefully that we all learned something today that's useful and we can take away and activate on. Let me introduce David Silva.
Well, hi everyone, and I guess I do want to normalize. There are a few seats here, so if you are standing in the outside area, you want to grab a seat, this is your moment to do so. If not, we've run out of time to stall for you there. Okay, good, we got one, okay. Oh, you had a reserved seat. Okay, there's still 4 seats going if you would like one. Well, thank you all for having me. My name is David Silva. I'm the mayor for the city of Buellton, and we have our city manager, Scott Wolf, joining us tonight. And one of the things that I just wanted to also bring to the attention is oftentimes when we discuss emergency preparedness, we discuss from the idea of a wildfire like what we saw with LA, where there's the evacuation, there is the destruction. But we are often dealing with emergencies that are also on a much smaller scale that can be very cumbersome without us having the proper knowledge. And I always go back to, if you think back to a few months ago, the spot fire just on the outskirts of Buellton, where we lost telecommunications and internet access. And we were about 12 hours away from a Mad Max situation from not having internet. What happens, though, is we assume that the information and the resources will be made available by our own kind of dependency upon technology. And so you being here today is so important for us because those things are not guaranteed during an emergency preparedness. And the other one is for your neighbors who don't know what's going on. And so by you coming here tonight, it's really a testament to your willingness to be engaged and informed, but also to help get this information out. We always are desperate. You want insurance when you've been in a car accident. You want to know what to do in an emergency situation when it's happening, but you need to do the investment right now. Buellton's a commuter city, and so oftentimes when an emergency happens, we're from afar having to deal with it. We're at work down in Santa Barbara, and if there's a quarter inch of rain on the 101, we may not know if we can get back in time because of who knows what that's going to do. And so with us being here today, I really encourage you to take notes and be able to be a proactive person in your neighborhood so that you can help spread this information, because we are so dependent upon you being champions for that and how to know to get this uniquely into them. The experts here are going to do a great job of explaining how to handle all of that, but I just want you to be aware, when we had the Taco Bell Mexican pizza come back, the traffic in Buellton was terrible. And that was its own form of emergency. What would we have done in that situation? And it's weird, but you kind of go with, we'll go with Christmas and Solvang. How do you handle traffic? Oh, yep, and everyone groaned right there. It's too soon to bring that up. But the reason we're here today is that emergencies aren't always going to be with a FEMA element to it. These can happen at any given moment, and if you've ever tried to get through this valley with any kind of light inconvenience situation, your knowledge here tonight is going to be critical. So thank you for being able to be involved in this, and please let us know how we can continue to support your community members. If we need to get this information out to people who aren't able to stream it or aren't here tonight, we are all here committed to get this information out, and we want to make sure we do that for you. So we will now pass it off to the headliner of the evening, Ms. Joan Hartman, who will go through the entire program for you.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. We're all, after the fires in LA, I think looking at our homes, our neighborhoods, our community with a different lens. And one of the things that I think is most important for us to remember is that resilience is built on relationships. There's a classic study that was done by a sociologist in the early 90s in Chicago. It happened to be of a heat wave, but it looked at two different communities and the seniors in those communities. One group went to the library every week. They knew each other, and they looked out for each other, and the others were isolated. And so after this horrific heat wave, they found that their survival rate among those who went to the library, who had social connections, who were looking out for each other, they had a much better survival than those who didn't. And so now in other areas of emergency, we understand that to be true. We all need to do what we can in our own house hardening, and you'll learn about the zone 0. I had to clear out all the plants that I'd cultivated right around my foundation of my house. I did that finally. It was very painful, some of the trees, but we have to do those kinds of things. We have to do our broader defensible space, but most importantly, after that, we need to work together as a community on a number of different aspects of this that you're going to learn about tonight. It's because of this idea of resilience built on relationships, as well as my profound belief that we can't expect County Fire to do it all. We have shared responsibility for our safety, and we have to step up. And so that was the reason I elbowed my way onto an organization board, the Fire Safe Council, because that's what their mission is to work in community, build relationships, inform people, do inspections, and they have a whole range of things that they're going to be talking about, but how we get prepared. And I think this is going to be ever more important because as climate change, we're seeing that in our county, the the temperatures are going up faster in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties even than elsewhere. And we're seeing the results of that with fire and drought and atmospheric rivers and, you know, the weird weather that we're experiencing. And so we really need to be able to focus on how we're going to prepare for all of this going forward. And the Fire Safe Council is there to help all of us and kind of complement what the county fire can do. As we get more and more and more events happening simultaneously, and that is going to happen. We already saw it in the LA area. You know, resources can't always be there immediately when they're stretched out over the state. So that means more than ever before, we are going to have to step up. And fire will always have some resources, but maybe not all that we would like, because we're gonna have to deal with a lot of different issues simultaneously. And so that means more than ever, we have to step up. So tonight we have the top people in the county who are working on these. We also have our Office of Emergency Management and the Fire Department tabling with materials. But I'm going to start out by introducing, well, I just want you to know he doesn't have an official role on the program. It's our Fire Chief, Mark Hartwig.
Why am I here? I should be there.
But we do have our Fire Marshal, Fred Tan, and he's going to lead off the program, and I'm sure Chief Hartwig will add something as appropriate. So Fred, take it away.
Sure, okay. All right. Well, thanks for being here. I'm just looking at a few of the elements I was supposed to address. I think one of the elephants in the room that was recently published with the new fire hazard severity zones in the local responsibility areas. So we can touch base on that real quickly, or at length as questions come up. I think we have a quick Q&A after the session. So as a result of some fires historically, I think in 1991 there was a fire, and the state was mandated to create some fire hazard severity zone maps in state responsibility areas. In this county of Santa Barbara, we have around 830,000 acres of state responsibility area, so almost twice as much as LA County, more than twice as much as Ventura County, something like 6 or 7 times as many as Orange County. So we protect a lot of state areas. The fire hazard severity zone maps were designed to be a lot like the flood maps, where fuel pushed by wind, topography, fire history may see some ember cast onto those, and there's with no real regard to mitigations, including prescribed fire activities that we conduct in the county, defensible space, home hardening activities that you do as a homeowner, zone 0 clearance that is now just starting to rear its head in the county and in the state. But that's essentially what a fire hazard severity zone is kind of a flood map for fire. After I think the Oakland Hills fire, and after that fire, it was required by the state for local responsibility areas such as the city of Solvang, cities of Buellton, Lompoc City, Santa Barbara City, Santa Maria, Santa Barbara, and Carpinteria. Those areas in unincorporated Santa Barbara County, those areas were required by the state, by CAL FIRE, to develop those maps in those jurisdictions. So the state maps were adopted last year. We didn't really have much say in the county, even though we're a contract county with CAL FIRE. And then this year, on March 10th, those maps were released to the local agencies. Solvang was on the ball, and they released those maps pretty quickly after the March 10th window. The majority of the county will be releasing those maps within their local jurisdictions sometime this week or early next week to meet their 30-day mandate. Other areas we didn't have to review as much, and there are some areas that we did have to do a little bit more review. The effect of those maps really are not to, insurance companies are mandated to assess the risk of a home. the risk that a home might catch on fire. From all other, and might also like be damaged by flood, earthquake. I know that's a different insurance, but it's the actual risk to a home. Homeowners can mitigate that risk through home hardening, zone 0, defensible space, and then the county fire departments and the other local jurisdiction fire departments, Montecito, Santa Barbara City, Carp, Summerlin, they all do a lot of work to mitigate, fires, the risk or the hazard that vegetation presents to homes and communities. So we take a lot of action in this county. My deputy fire marshal, and he's, it's weird to say because Vince and I worked for this man over here for a number of years as partners. But Vince Storacco in the back, he's the backbone of our prescribed fire program here in this county. If you've paid attention over the last 5 years, you've seen a lot of smoke in the air in the fall. We conducted the Spalding Midland burn. That's roughly 1,600 acre project. After we completed that creates about a 10-year buffer for the fuels to protect the local communities. We're planning the Sedgwick burn as funding becomes clear and as our other projects come through. That might be sometime next year. That's a 1,500 acre project that's going to increase alongside the lake fire behind it. That's taking out a lot of vegetation on the eastern side of the community to be able to prevent wildfires from impacting this community. And that was kind of those were designed and tied in by Vince and Rob to my left to coincide with a lot of agricultural fuel breaks that are in there, a lot of man-made fuel breaks, the freeways, the highways that are incorporated in the county, and then that ties into some fuel reduction projects that we have up over north of Los Alamos, and some prescribed fire activities that we had up in that area. So we're working pretty diligently as a county fire department to reduce fuels, to mitigate the hazard, to help you guys mitigate your risk in your homes, right? So that I think I covered most of that. The risk to this community, we had a town hall here, was it about 2 months ago, right after the Eaton and the Palisades fire. I had a good map that I was, Santa Barbara, if you go to sbcfire.com and you look for a map called Fire History, it looks like a child just spilled a paint kit all over the county, right? There's just fires all over this county. But if you notice and you look in the San Ynez Valley, there's not a lot of fire history. And there's some really, really positive characteristics to the county. We spent a lot of time when I first got into vegetation management looking into the problems that the issues that the front country faces, because the front country has sundowner winds, and those are the type of winds that really cause devastating fires. The Painted Cave Fire had the Painted Cave Fire in 1990 traveled all the way to the ocean. It was like 2 miles in 2 hours, 4 miles in 4 hours. I mean, it was just such a fast moving fire. And you experience that through the front country, and and that's where we focused a lot. But if you look at the San Ynez Valley, because of its agricultural activity, because of the fuel types, the kind of mild topography, the lack of sundowner or Santa Ana winds, we can do a lot more in a really favorable environment to reduce, maybe not reduce the amount of ignitions, but help reduce the size of fires. And that alongside with the 5 fire stations that run along Highway 246, the construction section that is like 12 minutes down the road with our dozer operators. Our crew is about 20 minutes away. We can really hop on fires here in the San Ynez Valley, so to do really good work. And that kind of relates to the fire history. If we're doing our part, and I think the first time I heard it, again, I keep pointing to my mentor here, because the first time I heard it was we have to learn with wildfire. We have to live with wildfire, I'm sorry. I was talking to a gentleman earlier about the Kenneth fire in Oak Park over off West Hills, Woodland Hills, and as the Palisades fire was burning, as the Eaton fire was burning, that fire ignited in an open, kind of a managed open space in a newer community. And in our goal of urban planning is to really accept the fact that fires are going to happen here in the county or in California. The Kenneth fire, when I saw that, I was at home at the time, I saw that start. I started driving over to it and looking at it and looking at the fuels and the fire history, which there really wasn't much in there. But, the agencies, the firefighters were able to hop on that fire and really make aggressive fire attack. And even though it was kind of heading towards a lot of newer homes, those newer homes were built with defensible space, fire access roads, what we call 7A construction, not Zone 0 yet, but it made those homes really defendable. They were able to get that fire out that evening. I think they called for 50 strike teams, which is what they called for during the Painted Cave fire, 250 fire engines. And they ended up sending those people, all those engines back within the first couple hours. So we are, slowly learning to live with wildfire. It's been much more rapid. The technology, the amount of work that we're doing. The Fire Safe Council has been ramping up, and we'll probably discuss that. The grants that we're getting through CAL FIRE to mitigate risk. But we are working in this county to make sure that we're reducing the risk to your parcels if you guys are also doing the same thing. So.
Thank you, Fred, very much. And there's some comfort in that, in all the activity that you're doing surrounding the valley that can create a buffer for us. Next, I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie Parkinson. She's the Executive Director for the Fire Safe Council. She'll tell you a little bit more about Fire Safe Councils, but this is the board, the nonprofit board that I elbowed my way onto before she was there. It had a budget of just a few $1,000s a year, and in the past few years now, it's millions of dollars, and they're doing tremendous work, and a lot of that is under Anne-Marie's direction. So, take it away.
Thank you. Then there's a PowerPoint. Olivia, do you do the controls? Yes. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Make sure the green light's on.
Okay, so everyone hear me? All right, cool. Yes. Yep. All right, well, what Fred was saying in terms of community field breaks and buffers is kind of a great segue into Firewise, because ourselves and the fire department work at a community scale trying to reduce risk, and then we also work at the neighborhood, within the neighborhood, to reduce risk. Because at the end of the day, we have a great fire department, a great EMS. They're very well trained on how to respond to emergencies, especially wildfires, considering our fire history. But it's the homeowners that have to do the home hardening. It's the homeowners that have to do the defensible space, have to sign up for SBC alerts. And so we work with entire communities to help reduce their risk and get together and get organized. Thank you.
Just say the next slide.
Okay, perfect, good to know. But a quick background about the Fire Safe Council before I dive more into Firewise. We are 501c3, like Joan mentioned. We were started in 1997, so we have over 28 years of helping the community be prepared for wildfires. We were originally established to help create a connection between the community and the agencies, help kind of bridge that gap there. And then we have had the same mission for 28 years, which is to promote wildfire safety through education and action. And a couple ways in which we do that, we have several programs and projects. Next slide, please. We do free chipping and free grazing. We do free defensible space assistance for low-income residents. We also help create community fuel buffers and are starting to get more involved in making hydrated fuel buffers. Those are just some oaks we've started planting around Painted Cave.
Could you elaborate on that, because I don't think people understand the concept?
Yeah, so typically the fire departments help create fuel bricks by removing vegetation, but we're getting more involved into planting vegetation and species that are very hydrated or resistant to flames, so it has more of an ecological benefit, not just tearing out native chaparral, but trying to also restore the ecosystem on top of that, and also has benefits of soil retention, biodiversity. So species like oaks are very resistant to fire. Agriculture like lemons, avocados, super resistant. Agave, cactus, we've done a few buffers with that around the mesa. So it looks better than just ripping out all the vegetation. And then we also do free home evaluations. So we have one of our assessors come to your house. He'll spend an hour with you walking around, informing residents what you can do to make your home more resistant to embers, to flames, what can make your egress safer for you to evacuate and safer for EMS to come in and feel more comfortable being at your property and staying there to defend it. And we also do free home hardening for low-income residents. Unfortunately, these funds are through SC&E, SoCal Edison, so we can only spend the money in SoCal Edison service area. But we are looking to always find more grants to provide services countywide. Next slide. And then we do a lot of community engagement and education. We do one large community event each year. And so this next slide, coming up in Cabrillo High School in Lompoc, we have a evacuation about wildfire survival. Next slide. So this workshop is focused on not just ready, set, go and making a to-go bag. It's really there to talk about if it hits the fan and whether or not you are prepared and have your to-go bag and have a plan with your family. What happens if you have to evacuate in flames and embers? So we really talk about how to give people the education resources they need to make potentially life and death decisions when they have to evacuate in these very, very kind of stressful, dangerous environments. Next slide. We also do focus groups to connect with communities and certain sectors to just learn about barriers people are facing to be involved with wildfire preparedness. That helps us inform our education, our resources, the grants we apply for. And probably our most important grant or program that we do is Fireways USA. And I have a little video to kind of help set the scene for that. And let's see if it works. If not, I can just talk about it.
Hill, I said, oh my God, we have a neighbor who's 94 years old who has dementia. And I said, there were no cars on the driveway. And we would go over and help him get in his chair, sometime if he fell with the caregiver. But I knew he was in the hospital. And I don't know, God was on his side. I decided to call his son in Massachusetts and said, hey, Francis, just to be sure, your dad's still in the hospital, right? He said, no, he got home last night. And there's a new caregiver and I don't have the number. And they wouldn't let us back up. So I finally got through to 911 and said, a welfare check, you got to go check on this guy. Well, there was a miscommunication. And I called my neighbor who hadn't evacuated yet. He was on his roof fighting his fire. He'd been on my roof. He'd hosed my roof down. I said, go in and check on him. He went. He said, the door's open. There's nobody here. He went in and yelled. He said, no, nobody here. I said, look, just go behind the pantry. There's a little room. We can see him during the day. He likes to sit there because there's a garden. He went in and found him. He'd been left alone. Okay? And it turned out the fire department made the new caregiver leave. And, she just does what she was told. They said, we're coming back for him. Got him out, and the house burned down about an hour later. He would have been in there alone. It was just... When we got to the bottom of the hill, I said, oh my God, we have a neighbor who's 94.
So I want to share that because when I saw that video during the Palisades and Eden fire burning, I got chills because that is exactly the point of Firewise. This guy knew his neighbor so well. He knew his elderly, he knew his son's number, he knew his neighbor's number, and knew where he liked to just sit in his house. So if he didn't know his neighbor that well, that guy would have perished. And that is exactly the point of Firewise. It's not for insurance discounts. It's not for us to go in and tell your neighbor you have to do your defensible space. It's for you guys to work together to identify those that are vulnerable and work with them and make a plan to help get them out in a scenario like that. Next slide. And so the program we use to engage with the community is called Fireways USA. It essentially provides a collaborative framework to help communities get organized, to understand their risk, and to work together to make a plan to reduce that risk over time. So it's important to note that we are not Firewise. It's a program run by the National Fire Protection Association. It's free. It's something that we use to engage with the community. And what's great about it is that it recognizes every community is different and unique. And so it has a few basic requirements, but how communities go about that is very much up to them. So it's very flexible in that sense, which we appreciate. Next slide. Right now, we have 30 fire waste communities in Santa Barbara. 3 years ago, we had 0. So we've definitely been ramping up and getting this program going, engaging with communities. We have 2 right now in North County. One in Sabata Canyon near Lompoc, and then Hanada Springs right outside of Buellton. Yes, sorry. I see you're like reach for it, and I think you're going to go. Next slide, yes. So the application process to become fire waste community has a few steps, and our staff help everyone go through this process. We're there from beginning to end. First is to get organized. Next slide. So we help create a committee for the community. It's essentially a liaison for us and the rest of the community. They're the ones we connect with and talk with, help get information, and then they report kind of community concerns back to us too. The next slide. And the second step is to make a plan. So we work with the fire waste leaders to identify a boundary, so who's in and who's out. We bring in the local fire prevention officer, usually that's county fire, to do a risk assessment where we look at a broad scale, looking at the community, what are the risks? Is there a certain hill the community is concerned about? So we can have those experts there to say, is that really a concern? Is it not? What are some mitigation we can take for that area? And then we take all of that on top of any other community concerns and incorporate that into a 3-year action plan, which is essentially a wish list of items that the community thinks they can do in 3 years to help reduce their risk. And then this third part is doing. Next slide. And so every community has to do a community education activity, 1 per year. We usually include the risk assessment as that education activity. Every homeowner in the community is asked to do 1 volunteer hour, which is super simple. Everyone does it. I guarantee it. It's at a kind of collective scale, so you have to ask every single neighbor to report. It's if you have 80 homes, they want a minimum of 80 hours, and so if one homeowner does 100, that counts for the whole community. It's really just about kind of getting the community to be involved and start making these small steps to being more fire safe. It's not meant to be this really rigorous program. And then the third part is reporting how much vegetation has been removed from the community. And we have templates to help out with all of this. And so going through that process, you become FireWise, but being FireWise and being fire safe is not a one-time activity. You have to keep doing actions every year for the rest of us being in existence to maintain that status. And so every single year, the communities are asked to do that doing section. So the volunteer hours, reporting, vegetation removal, and education events. And again, we help out with all of this. Every 3 years, redo the action plan, and every 5 years, redo the risk assessments. Next slide. And so if you're thinking, this is really great, we really want to do this, want my community to be safer, but how much time will this take? Because we all have jobs and lives and families. So if you are really passionate and want to be on the FireWise committee, we ask that you help out with the application process, which is just 1 time. And then after that, it's really just helping chip away at items on your action plan, which we help delegate, helping out with the renewal process, collecting people's volunteer hours. And if you're not a community member, but very much support your community doing this, we just ask you keep doing your 1 volunteer hour, which I know everyone does a minimum of 50 a year, just maintaining your vegetation, going to events like this would count. And then it'd be great to report those hours to your FireWise leaders to make their jobs much easier. Next slide, please. And so the benefits of being a FireWise community, I don't have my glasses on, so I can't read most of that, but I can go off of my memory, is really helps us with grant applications and helps the community with grant applications if you want to go on your own. Recognizing fire is a shared risk and the fire department can't do everything, the community has to do their part. So being FireWise shows grantors that's really taking this seriously, and we have a plan too going forward that the community has agreed upon. We have used FireWise to prioritize our grant funds. There's only so much money to go around. And so we recognize FireWise communities take a lot more advantage of our programs than non-FireWise communities. And it helps us inform grant applications that we're writing. There's also insurance benefits. So admitted carriers are required to provide a discount. That does include the California Fair Plan. I've heard they give around 10% discounts. And then the reason I have that there in bold is thinking back to the video that was shared earlier is building community connections is a really important part in kind of the purpose of FireWise to help make plans for elderly neighbors, to help get people out. I've heard so many stories of people who know their neighbors are just have made those plans and they are a lot less stressed when evacuation happens. And the communities that have those higher social connections are a lot more resilient to disaster, recover a lot faster. So that's what Firewise is really about, and that's why we help communities do it. And so that's like a big benefit of the program. The next slide. And just some quick success stories. These are just a few of the many things that we've helped communities do. We helped a few do live evacuation drills with the fire department and OEM helping out. We have helped do community fuel buffers, so we did a nice one around Ariba Way. We've done a few oak plantings around Trout Club and the Mesa, Painted Cave. Again, knowing what communities need to feel safe really helps us drive our grant applications and our programs. We've also helped connect a closing nonprofit, a van that they had, we're trying to get rid of, to another nonprofit. And probably one of my favorite things is just seeing some community members that we've worked with come join our board of directors and provide that influence or the voice of the community through our programs as a director, which I think is really fun. And I think, next slide, this last one, contact information and our email. We have pamphlets outside that also have more information about Firewise, and you can also come talk to me afterwards.
Thank you, Anne Marie. That reminds me of a statistic. By 2030, we expect that 25% of our population in the state and in the county will be over 60. In Solvang, already 38% of the population is over 60. I don't know what that means. and we have a great new senior center coming on board. But what that means, though, is I once heard a fire chief say, after the Thomas fires, the problem is the seniors. It wasn't exactly the politically correct thing to say, but what he meant was it's very difficult to get seniors to evacuate. They want to stay home, or they don't, as we heard in this story. So I think we all in the valley, where we do have an older population, have a special responsibility to look out for our seniors and make sure that we try to get them engaged in this process. So Chief Harwick, I'm going to make you the closer. I'm not going to have you, I'm going to have you talk at the end, if that's okay, unless you had something to add right now.
No, I'll wait. Thank you.
So what you're going to hear is kind of like Russian nesting dolls, at different levels of activity. So we know about individual defensible space, and now you've heard about being a Firewise community. That's at the neighborhood level, and that's really, really significant. In my neighborhood, we're lucky we have a gal, Kim Pananides, and she's organized, and we've worked on evacuation routes, and we have a list of everybody and their contact information and their animals and any special needs they have. So we're really taking steps in this direction. You heard about a bigger level, a regional level, where we're trying to create kind of a quilt of agricultural lands and fire breaks, but also more natural landscapes that are fire resistant. Between those is something called a community wildfire protection plan. And that is at the larger level beyond just the neighborhood. I want everybody here to go back to their neighborhood and create a Firewise community and go to Anne Marie. But I also am eager, my agenda in this meeting isn't just to give you information, it's really to take action. And the action is to work towards a community wildfire protection plan for the Santa Ynez Valley as a whole. And so we've done this in different areas throughout the county, mostly in South County, most recently on the Gaviota Coast. And now we're coming up, and it's time, I think, for the Santa Ynez Valley. And if we can show enough interest here, then Anne Marie and the Fire Safe Council can apply for a grant and help us put this kind of community wildfire protection plan together. So Rob Hazard is on the board of the Fire Safe Council. He was our county's former fire marshal. He now works consulting on doing these kinds of plans, and he's going to tell us more about them.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's so refreshing to be sitting up here next to Fred in his black uniform, and I get to be in my very comfortable civilian uniform. So it's nice to be up here. And I also have a presentation, I believe. It should be on there. All right. So Joan set the stage perfectly. Firewise communities are kind of the backbone of how we create resilience at the neighborhood scale. And then we all know that at the state level, there's many efforts to reduce risk across California. And Chief Tan talked about one of the primary things that we have out there, which is our base map of our fire hazard across the landscape, the fire hazard severity zones. So at our community scale, when we're talking about communities, for example, along the South Coast, we carved out community wildfire protection plans that roughly corresponded to areas that had similar topography, similar fire history, and similar weather patterns and vegetation. So the backbone of wildland fire, what makes fire do what it does, in the fire service, we call it fire behavior. So the way a fire interacts and the way it moves across the landscape, it's really driven by three things. Probably everybody in here intuitively would understand this, that there's vegetation that's burning, and it's burning on the landscape that has topography, the shape of the land, and then you have the weather that pushes that fire. And so those three things come together, creates the type of fires that we see, sometimes the Palisades or a small little grass fire in the San Ynez Valley that I'm sure many of you have probably seen living here. And so a community wildfire protection plan is a way to look at that interaction of weather, fuels, and topography and figure out ways at a smaller scale, a community scale, to reduce some of that underlying hazard and thereby reduce the risk to the communities. So next slide. All right. So what is a community wildfire protection plan? And you can click through these because they're gonna pop up each bullet. So it's a plan for at-risk communities. It's developed collaboratively, so this is super important. Just like with Firewise communities, you need to have collaboration. It evaluates the wildfire hazard, the baseline hazard, and then the associated risk, looking at things like the built environment, the values that you have in your landscape and in your community. Next bullet. It identifies and prioritizes areas for hazardous fuel reduction treatments, and it recommends best management practice. And that might be different depending on the community values. Some community might have sensitive habitat that they want to minimize the amount of disturbance on. In other areas, you might have a massive overload of dead timber, for example, if you live up in Northern California. And so that's a problem. And so every community is going to have a different approach to dealing with vegetation management. Next bullet. And this is super important, increasingly more important as we get more data about the damage that fires cause and why we have this type of situation that we see down in the Palisades fire, what we saw up in the community of Paradise a couple years ago, what we saw up in Santa Rosa a few years before that, what we saw here in our own county in the 1990 Painted Cave fire. We're increasingly determining that things we do to reduce the ignitability of our homes and buildings is one of the most important ways we can mitigate risk. So next slide. So there's a couple things that a community wildfire protection plan is not. So unlike a lot of other government plans, for example, community plans, projects where you're building something, those types of efforts typically when they involve government, making a decision about something always require CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. Or if they involve federal lands, they require some type of analysis determined by NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So a community wildfire protection plan, on the other hand, it's like a visioning document. It's a blueprint for steps that a community could decide to take moving forward. And typically a CWPP becomes a great framework for subsequent projects and actions that either a county or a city could take using public funds and public effort, or communities could also take on some of these projects at a community scale. So next slide. So it's not a decision document. Next bullet. It's not a vegetation management plan. It will describe a lot of potential projects involving vegetation management, but itself is not a vegetation management plan. It's not an environmental analysis document, and it's not a project. All right, next slide. So again, they make recommendations, but they don't require agencies or government to take action. So they're essentially a framework that a community can take when they get funding, when they have the effort and the public support to engage in certain actions. The CWPP provides that blueprint, sort of ready-made, like, hey, we just got this grant to do this action. It's identified in this plan. Next slide. So there's some requirements, and it's interesting how this was all developed. So the CWPP document was originally designed through the 2003 Healthy Forest Restoration Act. So this is when George Bush was president. So this is going back a long time. And it had to do with a lot of the federal lands that had overgrowth of timber. So a lot of the timber industry had gone into decline. Forests were overgrown. 100 years of very successful fire suppression by the federal agencies. All of this came together to create very thick and overgrown forests that were very fire prone. And so the government was looking for a way to get money out to start to deal with this problem. And some of that money they wanted to go to communities. They wanted to get the money out where they could do field treatments adjacent to communities at risk. But one thing that funders are always nervous about is funding projects and never having anything get done. Maybe there's public opposition that they didn't know about. Maybe there's constraints that weren't identified during the funding process. And so they wanted a document that would ensure that the communities were supportive of these types of efforts and that basic planning occurred before grant funds went out. And so that's what became the concept of the CWPP. So next bullet. So some minimum requirements. They have to have regional collaboration. So for example, even if a CWPP was only done by a local city, you would still want to have collaboration with the adjoining county lands. If you had a CWPP that involved some federal lands, you'd want to make sure there was collaboration with that national forest or BLM lands or whoever the agency happened to be. And then the most important is that collaboration has to occur with the communities themselves. So the neighborhood associations, public and private stakeholder groups within those communities, that they all feel like they have a voice in this plan. And then the second thing is it has to develop prioritized hazardous field treatment units. So this really does date back to that 2003 act that they really were focusing these documents on vegetation management. And then the third bullet was to develop strategies to reduce structural ignitability. So figure out some things that people could do and communities could do to make homes more resistant to ignition by a wildland fire. And think about this in context of across the national scale, there were many, many, many counties that weren't even incorporating any kind of wildland building code requirements for fire resistance. California is kind of ahead of the curve in this. We have some of the most robust fire code requirements. But the catch on that is they apply to all buildings built essentially sometime after 2009, 2010, depending on when a local jurisdiction adopted those codes. And so we have tons of old homes throughout our county, for example, that are susceptible to ignition. They need to be retrofitted so that they are more in conformity with their current code. Next slide. And then another requirement of these plans, and this is what gives it a little bit of teeth, is that they require local government approval. And so, for example, if a city is doing a CWPP, the city council would need to approve it. If it's a joint, and this has happened where we have a CWPP that covers both a city and a county, so then you need signatures from your county board of supervisors and your city councils. And then you want local and state fire agencies to sign off on it. So for example, a CWPP here in the Valley would require the Santa Barbara County Fire Department chief to sign it, and then CAL FIRE would review the document, given the state's responsibility for the SRA lands. And so their forester would sign it. Next slide. And then some benefits. So clearly they identify and clarify priorities for protection of life and property. And so just in the interest of mitigating risk to all of us, they're a great starting point for figuring out where we need to do projects and where we need to put our effort. And then the bottom bullet is pretty much the reason why most areas decide to do a CWPP is because you become eligible for a lot of grant funding. Most of the grants out there, whether they're grants from the state of California or from the federal government, and there's numerous programs right now that are granting out millions of dollars for wildfire mitigation projects. Almost universally, they typically require that the project is located within an area that has a CWPP. Or they'll always ask the question. And if you don't have one, then it's kind of like you're sort of backpedaling in your application and trying, I've had this happen many times where a community member calls the fire department and says, hey, we want to do this application for a grant. We don't know if we're in a CWPP area. And so the presence or the having the CWPP makes a community much more likely to receive grant funding. All right, next slide. Okay, purpose of the plan, enhance community wildfire preparedness and protection by identifying the fire hazard risk reduction strategies and having these strategies be in balance with sustainable ecological management and fiscal resources, because mitigation is expensive and it has an impact on the environment. And so the plan is a great framework for figuring out how to prioritize and balance all that. All right, next slide. So evolution of CWPPs, just flip through these bullets. So the prioritization back in 2003 was based on some pretty old technology, old modeling, and mostly local fire agency input. I'll give you an example. The first CWPP in Santa Barbara County was for the community of Mission Canyon. It was homegrown. They wrote it themselves with a little bit of help from one of the county fire planning captains. And the modeling was very basic. And essentially, the prioritized list of projects just came out of the fire department's mind. We went up in there, scouted out. We knew where they needed to do work, and that's what went into the project list. So there really wasn't a lot of complex modeling. Next bullet. So they typically also had limited community outreach and engagement. It was just difficult at the time to really outreach to a lot of people. And the end product was always a big, giant document. And still to this day, the end product will be a very, very large document, hundreds of pages. I was actually reading one of them this afternoon, one that I helped write, and I still got lost in it. Next bullet. So current CWPPs are much more focused on community engagement, outreach, and education. So what's happened is that we're now seeing the value of these documents it's like Firewise on steroids for a larger community. And the engagement process is where you can then start talking about things like Firewise. You can get fire safe councils to come in and start having these one-on-one conversations with smaller neighborhoods and communities. And it's also a great opportunity for the community to meet their fire agency people. Fire departments are busy. They have a lot. There's, Fred's spinning a lot of plates. And typically a CWPP process, and by the way, they often take up over a year to get through. But within that year, you get a lot of attention from your fire department and from other agency folks. County planners get involved and they start to, help out with the process. Public works folks. So they're a great way to kind of capture the attention of some of the public servants out there that have a lot to bring to the table, but they're just busy and they're always trying to triage their time. Next slide. The fire hazard and risk modeling tools are way better than they were years ago. So that portion of the document is really cutting edge. It really helps out a lot, especially for agency folks when they're planning larger projects like prescribed fire type efforts. Next bullet. And CWPPs now address a lot more than vegetation management. So yes, they will develop prioritized lists of places to do projects, but they're also going to talk about a lot of other stuff. Structure hardening is one of the biggest. We know increasingly that that's the reason that we have fires like the Palisades. Had those structures down on the Palisades been hardened structures or modern building code construction, it's possible that the outcome would have been very different. There would have been a much reduced level of damage. Ultimately, these fires that are causing thousands of homes to go up in flames are typically a conflagration. And once a wildland fire transitions into the buildings and becomes a conflagration, it really doesn't matter anymore about the wildland vegetation. It's sort of irrelevant. And how many people here, I bet if you all raised hands, how many people have noticed pictures in the media and videos of the aftermath of these fires, and you sort of notice this crazy pattern of all these burned up homes surrounded by green trees? I mean, how many people have seen that, right? I mean, even the conifers, Town of Paradise, all the conifers were there, every house was nuked. The big bad eucalyptus tree that everybody hates. You can find pictures from 2003 in San Diego, down when they had this cedar fire, row upon row of homes in Scripps Ranch down to their foundations, surrounded by green eucalyptus trees. And so really, what's really burning in these massive conflagrations is our homes. That's what's burning. And so the things we can do to harden homes is super important. And so the documents have really evolved to recognize these risks now, that it's beyond just a risk of wildfire on the landscape. All right, next slide. Okay, some goals and objectives. So we'll run through these pretty quick. So we want to reduce the wildfire hazard within our CWPP area to enhance community and firefighter safety. We want to enhance protection of our values at risk from wildfire. So values at risk are structures, infrastructure, our recreational resources, and natural and cultural resources. And kind of think about, while we go through this list, think about like the values that were at risk when you had the lake fire recently. And just think about Figueroa Mountain and how many people go up there and recreate there. And there's just so much to that mountain range, the San Rafaels, that has values that we all cherish. We want to integrate fire and fuels management activities with land management priorities. So again, that's very applicable to where the lake fire burned, because you have national forest lands, national forest land management policy, and then you have state lands that are protected by the county fire department. You have natural preserves like the Sedgwick Reserve. So lots of different priorities out there, and a CWPP is a great way to bring that all together. Next bullet. We want to encourage communication and coordination of our fire and fuels management activities with affected stakeholders. Next bullet. And we want to increase community awareness, education about practices to reduce risk. Things like defensible space, fuel reduction, home hardening. We want to educate ourselves about the steps that we can take. Anne-Marie said it brilliantly that most of the action we're going to take to reduce risk happens at the parcel level. It happens at your home and your property, particularly in the San Ynez Valley. San Ynez Valley is a classic example of kind of what we call an intermix, right? So it's not a dense community. Some portions are, but the majority of the valley is sort of intermixed with vegetation, grass and trees, and a lot of agricultural activities. And so it's really important in the valley to take those individual steps on your parcels. All right, next slide. So how can this plan help the community? We already mentioned some of these. We're going to better identify our fire risk, things we can do to mitigate that, dealing with vegetation and fuels, the structures that we have, incredible access to grants. So that's a huge benefit to a CWPP is the access to grants. And stakeholder coordination. So just like FireWise brings neighbors together, CWPPs bring all the stakeholders together. So you'll get these really great conversations that happen between the fire department and some of the other agencies. A plan for the San Ynez Valley would be really impactful, because now you'd have two cities and the county all coming together and dealing with wildfire risk cohesively. Next bullet. And an integration of field treatments with cooperators. So this is really important, particularly in the valley, because you have federal lands sort of surrounding you on the mountain ranges, both the top of the San Ynez Mountains and the San Rafaels. Those are all under federal land management priorities. And then you have the state lands, right, where county fire does prescribed burn projects and fuel reduction treatments along roads in cooperation with other entities. So it's really important that these are all integrated together. And next bullet. And then best management practices developed that the community supports. So the things that are important to you, you can do a field treatment in many ways. You could take a bulldozer and just blow all the vegetation off the top of a mountain, or you could use a more surgical technique. You could use things like managed prescribed fire. You could use hand crews to create shaded fuel breaks and do more thinning effort and getting rid of dead fuels, but leaving the forest itself where we like to recreate and the benefits that come with having that environment. Next slide. So major components of a plan. We'll go through these real quick. So we have a wildfire hazard assessment. We then do a risk assessment of the community, okay, based on that hazard assessment. This looks at building construction. Next bullet. Proximity of structures to wildland fuel. Keep going. Road access. Availability of water. This is a big one in the valley, by the way. There's a sort of unique mix of San Ynez Valley Water District and then private water systems all over the place. I dealt with that a lot when I was fire marshal. I know Fred deals with it all the time. Some really strange situations happen when people are building houses and they realize, well, no, that hydrant is on this system, and so you need a hydrant over here. And so, yeah, that needs a lot of analysis. The wildfire ignition history. We have great data on wildfire ignitions in the valley. We know where the fires are starting. We know what's causing them. That defines our fire prevention priorities. Next slide. And then identification of values at risk. So the plan would identify life, property, critical infrastructure, natural and cultural resources, and recreational amenities threatened by wildfire. So that's really important. Think about all the things you like to do in the valley. How would they be impacted by wildland fire? And yeah, just click through these. Identification of structure hardening measures, identification of potential hazardous fuel reduction treatments, best management practices, and then at the end of every document will be the recommendations. And so this is sort of the bullet list that will be created. And it's typically the list that if you're staying on top of it, whether you're a community member, a community group, or public servants, you have that list. And that's really the list that you can take to the funders, to the electeds, to policymakers, and say, hey, we wrote this plan, we put all this effort into it. Here's the list of recommendations. Where are we at with this? Where are we at with these recommendations? So it's a great tool for both government and the private sector to stay on top of the things that we identify that need to be done. Next slide. And this is just kind of a cool diagram. Shows the process in basically a little flow there. Initial community outreach. This is probably the most important thing is the community outreach. Wildfire hazard assessment. We identify our community values. We do the wildfire risk assessment. We hold a bunch of community workshops. They're kind of like this, typically 3 or 4 of those. There's agency outreach that occurs, and you'd be surprised the number of different agencies that come in. And then the draft CWPP takes form. There's community and agency review period, and then the final CWPP goes to your Board of Supervisors and your city councils. And one thing that is throughout this entire process is you create this group called the development team. It's a list of agency folks and community people that want to be involved in this. And those development teams, they work hard. It's a process that takes probably a year at least. But you develop lasting relationships that pay dividends down the road. So I was in the Gaviota Coast development team. I work with a bunch of people on the Gaviota Coast doing that plan. While that plan was being written, we had the Alisol fire. And those very same people on that development team were community members out there. And so I was getting text messages, and I'm going to the fire, running around the hill, trying to deal with the tactical and strategic objectives of firefighting. And I'm getting text messages from development team members of that project. They still had my number, and they're like, hey, here's my gate code. Oh, hey, I know that this ranch still has cattle out down in Tahigas Ranch. So I was getting all this really critical information from some of those folks that were on that development team. So it's a huge way to bring people together and kind of get out of our silos and be synchronized in how we deal with all this. All right, next slide. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Rob. Right now, the Fire Safe Council is working on a community wildfire protection plan in Lompoc. And we don't know after that where we're going to go next. And attention follows where there's desire, where people really say, we want this. And so my hope is tonight we'll have people sign up and say, we really want to get involved. We want one of these for the Santa Ynez Valley, and we'll contribute time and effort to the project. But one of the issues that really happens during a fire, I've been evacuated twice. I live in the Honolulu Springs Ranch area. And one of the biggest thing is how do we get our animals out? And I remember the last fire, we have a 3-horse trailer and 6 equines. And so my husband took off with the trailer, and there I was trying to lead 2 horses with the burro following me. Hot, dry. Fortunately, a neighbor went by and gave me some water, but the burro bolted back home, and there I was leading the horses out. I mean, it was just, I'll never forget how scary that was. And so we have Sarah Aguilar here, who is the director of our county animal services. We're really lucky to have her. She's doing a tremendous job, and tonight is just one small sliver of the things that she does, but she's going to talk about evacuation of our non-human companions.
Thank you, Supervisor Hartman. Good evening, everyone. My name, as she said, is Sarah Aguilar. I also have a presentation. However, it is not full of data and statistics and things that you should do. It's very short. That's me. We covered that. All right, we're not going to read through this, but I wanted to share this handout. It's available in the lobby at the OEM table. I was going to call it a desk. And this is a nice, easy checklist for preparing large animals, livestock, for disaster. Specifically fire in here, but a lot of this is very useful. We know that when disaster strikes, let me move that a little closer, that our first instinct is protect our families, protect our animals, and to get them safe. And during an emergency, time is very short. Stress is high. Your options become very limited very quickly. So the most important thing that you can do is have a plan before disaster strikes. You can't just load your large animals into a car and take off down the road. You can't just put them at a hotel. You have to have somewhere to go. There's trailers and equipment. Often you need additional help. As in Supervisor Hartman's case, there's 6 animals, 2 people, a 3-horse trailer. You need some additional resources. So a plan means knowing that you will know how you will evacuate, you'll know where you'll go, and you know what you'll bring. So regularly, as you've heard multiple times, that means knowing your neighbors, knowing your resources, knowing their resources, working together to determine how you will assist each other and what you need. Preparedness for large animals in fires and disasters is not just about saving the animals' lives, but it also has an impact on humans as well and potential for human tragedy. So time that is spent trying to rescue unplanned for animals during disaster is time that could be spent saving humans or households, buildings, other things. So I guess the best reminder is that if something depends on us in a day-to-day basis, they also depend on us during a disaster. So this form, this flyer just has really basic information on what to do before a fire, things to prepare for, things to think about, things to plan. Also what to do when there is a red flag warning or an evacuation warning, and how to begin taking action quickly. And then there's also information if your plan is to shelter your animals in place. What resources do you need to have? What do local firefighters or animal services need to know? What supplies need to be available, et and then the next slide, this is just a QR code, and it's real pretty, isn't it? This QR code is going to take you to a brand new form that I just made today. And it is a livestock registry. So it's a voluntary registry where you can go in, you can put your contact information, the type of animals you have, how many, what resources you have. Is there things we need to know, such as gate codes, or there's not a turnaround for a trailer? Anything that will be useful for us helping you to evacuate. We saw during the mountain fire a large need very quickly to move quite a few equines, cattle, ostriches. I love the ostrich story. Llamas, pigs, all sorts of things came up. And we have one trailer as animal services. So we're not coming to help unload and relocate 500 head of cattle or 6 horses even. So it's very important that folks have a plan, and many people didn't have one. And so we created a mutual aid process where folks who needed help could tell us what they need, and folks who were offering help could tell us what they had to share. And overwhelmingly, I think it was like 65% of the people that signed up and filled out that form were offering support. And it speaks volumes to the community and the importance of knowing your neighbors, of communicating and being able to work together, especially in a neighborhood like, well, not a neighborhood, but an area such as this.
So Sarah, if people are register on your new form, then you have a resource. So when others decide, I have a trailer, I have various things to come in, you can give them direction about what they should be looking for and how they can best help.
Absolutely. It will be on our website tomorrow. That's why I don't have a website address for it right now. But the form is live. It will be on our website tomorrow. And I know not everybody is using QR codes and going on websites and things. And so I was thinking as we were speaking that it might be really useful to also send a mailer out that people could manually complete and send back to us. But the most important thing is that when we know a disaster's coming, we have a very short response time, especially for large animals. It gets incrementally harder every smidge of darkness that we increase. So we want to be able to get animals out during light. We want to be able to get them out ahead of fires. We don't want to be clogging up roadways for fire trucks and other first responders to get in. So if we have information where we know there's animals on your property, maybe you're at work, maybe you're need assistance, we can contact you directly and say, do you have a plan? Do you need help? We know you have 12 horses or 14 llamas or whatever you have.
Great. Okay, Chief Hartwick, and then we'll open it for questions.
I was taking notes, so I don't have no original content. I'm just gonna my takeaways, and it's interesting. And thank you, Supervisor Hartman. I want to start with the supervisor. We often find ourselves as department heads within cities or counties trying to convince the decision makers that what we see is most important. And I came into this position being told by Supervisor Hartman that this was the most important. So you have her attention. What makes us different here in this county? I really believe what makes us different here in this county is that there's a culture of readiness here. And it starts with the board. It starts with the elected board who says, I know the risk, and what do you need to alleviate the risk? What can I do? Supervisor Hartman sits on the Fire Safe Council as a member. Very rare. I've never seen it anywhere in the state. I've been across the state, and I haven't seen that. So she's not just interested, she's committed. And so when she's offering a community welfare protection plan, not that she's the sole decision maker on the board, but that would advocate for it, I would take her up on it. So I just wanted to recognize the effort, Supervisor, your efforts on wildfire protection and mitigation, risk management here. And I know Garrett Huff, he's the other deputy chief. He stopped by here too, but I don't think he wanted to sit up front like I didn't. I think there he. Okay, yeah, there he is. Yeah.
Sit out there.
Sorry, I called you out. Yeah, he was fine out there. And just a couple other quick takeaways on the different presentations. One is on the maps that Fred shared, our fire marshal. It will be controversial. Why? Because when some areas identified as a very high fire hazard severity zone, it has a lot of implications to a lot of part of your life, to include insurance. I need to make it very clear that the state just came out with new maps. Nothing here changed. The topography didn't change, the risk here didn't change. There was a lot of information that was fed into a computer, the Lawrence Livermore Labs, that came up with a model. We still have risks here, and that didn't take into account local conditions, to include access and egress. And if I go to any meeting on this throughout the county, it's people saying, how about access when everybody needs to get out at once? We saw it, bulldozers were pushing cars aside on Sunset Boulevard in LA because everybody was trying to get out at once. A nice wide road. The bottom line is, when it's time to go, there's not enough room on any roadway. And so those are the kind of things, especially up in our canyons, that we take into account when we modify the maps from what the state was. So we're gonna put something out this week. I think Fred just kind of gave you a primer, but we're gonna put something out that says this is what the state recognizes. We can't make it any less than that, but we don't want to deviate from the previous maps, which said we know what the risk is here. We've lived it, you've lived it, and we want to make sure that we put something out that is an accurate representation. So I just wanted to put that. Yes.
To clarify, so it's a negotiation now between you and the state about what the final map will look like?
Well, actually, it's a little bit different than that. The state says this is our recommendation. These are our maps. This is the determination. They say it doesn't take into account local conditions. So they really are looking to local government to say you can't make it any less than what it is right now, but you can make it more strict based on local conditions. And so, as Fred said, the science is good for what the science used, what they used for inputs in the science. They just didn't use everything, and we just want to make sure that everything is. So it will come out different than, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that. This is a great just preview, that it's going to come out different than what the state said, and of course we're looking at those local conditions.
So my area went from what, severe to very severe, so it's not going to go down even though conditions haven't changed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, of course, your area didn't change. The map changed, but what we know that happens in your area didn't change. And I think that's what nothing magically changed overnight. In fact, those maps were actually created before the Eaton and the Palisades fire. So just keep that in mind. Not that they would have been any different, because the computer is the computer, but local conditions didn't play into that. We talked a lot about kind of the macro. We started at the state. Robbie talked about kind of the state efforts, and then we talked about CWPP, which are really kind of regional efforts. Just a couple things on the CWPP, and you probably noticed on the Newshawk we just released the Foothill CWPP down off of 154, the Foothill communities, which basically links the south coast to the Gaviota Coast, which is the plan that Robbie talked about. And we have one in Lompoc. And now, of course, we're looking, you can see what we're trying to do is we're trying to weave all of these together so that none of them really stands alone. It's tied in with the Santa Barbara CWPP and the CARP and Summerlin. And it's kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge, because the Foothill one was done in 2011 and now it's 2025. So we're gonna, at some point, there's either a new one that's happening or there's a rewrite of the old one, taking into account all the things that happened before. But even then, the CWPP is macro. You get into the Firewise, and I can't say enough about, I live in a Firewise community. I can't say enough about what Firewise community is. That it's brought us together. We have a clubhouse, but we use it, it seems like most, for Firewise stuff. And if it isn't a Firewise event, we actually have Firewise stuff out there. So we're getting together over the Firewise. We can have a Firewise home. We can have home hardening. We can make sure our property is good. But if our neighbor's property isn't good, then then our property isn't going to be good. Because what we know is we know that embers will carry it to, typically not direct flame impingement, we're going to have embers that carry it to our home. So having a neighborhood that is fire-wise protects your property. And of course, there's that social aspect that I think Supervisor Hartman talked about, which is, I think, is so very important, because we meet people and then we just don't walk away from them. We had to renew our FireWise status this year. And we're proud of that, but that means we all got back together and we talked again about what we're doing and what we could do even better. And so I just, and then of course, that's kind of the community, and then the Ready, Set, Go. We don't talk about Ready, Set, Go very often anymore, but one thing we're gonna find in the after actions from both Palisades and Eaton, I'm sure, I don't want to tell you that I know exactly what's going to happen, but we know what ready means. We know that we get those things that are dear to us, papers, medications, those things that are right by the door, especially during fire weather, that we can pick up and grab. The set part, though, is where we, now when fire weather comes, we're on alert. I think we get complacent on the go part. Go doesn't mean go when you're told to go. Go means go when you think you need to go. What we found in the Palisades and Eaton fire both is people weren't told to go, and so they didn't go until it was too late. But many of them, when you hear them talk about their story, they had a sense that something was coming, or they saw something and they stayed until they were told to go, and the told to go never came. Or it came so late that everybody's out on the street at the exact same time. No matter how good your street system is, and we're challenged sometimes on our street systems here. We live in a beautiful place, but they're smaller roads and they're narrow. No matter how good they are, they were never designed to have everybody on them at one point. So that means that if you think that you might have to go later or be told to go later, you might want to think about going a little bit sooner. I think Ready, Set, Go, and we'll see it more towards the flood events, where we know that there's a flood warning or a flood watch, and we tell people, hey, think about going right now until the before the rain starts falling. We don't do that on fire. I don't know exactly why. We know that there's fire weather, we know there's winds, we know that there's multiple fire starts, and yet we sit in our homes until we're told to go, instead of thinking, you know, maybe I go down the street, or I go to a neighbor or a friend's house, or I go to a family member's house. So just, that's the personal responsibility. Couple real quick things on websites that I use. There's home hardening. If you have a few dollars to redo your vents, your attic vents, or you have a lot of money that you want to invest in your home and roofs, that both the County Fire and the Fire Safe Council have great websites where you just click and it'll tell you what part of your home needs to be hardened and how you can do that. Robbie did a great video before he retired with the city of Goleta, talking about this new Zone 0, which is that 5-foot space, and then the up to 30 in Zone 1, and then 30 to 100 in Zone 2, and then making sure in the Zone 3 you have your roadway and your access and egress done. But those are great videos. I still refer people, I refer to those myself, and I refer people to those all the time. And then, of course, we just live in a community that is so collaborative. I mean, I'm not looking at a city or a city council member or a city manager that I work with. We're looking at neighbors, or we're dealing with neighbors, our fire service neighbors, or our law enforcement. I saw our law enforcement partners who do all of our. We're deciding whether or not we need to evacuate on the hood of a car with our battalion chiefs, our operational battalion chiefs, which are here. Vince is here. And then we have our law enforcement partners that are looking at where the fire's heading and what we need to do. So just a shout out for all you. I know I'm preaching to the choir. Not many people spend their evening out here, so but really excited to see how much work is being done on it. And then again, thank you, Supervisor Hartman, for seeing the need and taking the time for this.
Thank you. It was actually Councilmember Arona who suggested this after the LA fires, and I'd been wanting to do something, but it was her who prompted me. So why don't you and David take questions?
Before we get going, I know there's going to be some questions, and you all have cards to ask your questions, and we'll collect it, or we'll bring the mic to you. But it just occurred to me that we are in great hands with these great leaders who do a lot of work to keep us safe.
Oh, there, it was on mute. There we go. All right. Chief. Supervisor Hartman, distinguished members of the City Council from both cities, and our distinguished speakers, thank you guys for taking the time to be here. This is obviously a very important topic, not just for the county, but for the valley as a whole. Supervisor Hartman, you started off by saying that we have great emergency services and a great fire department under great leadership, and it's our job to support them. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. We do. We have a very exceptional fire department. We have a very aggressive wildland fire department. And I think the support of that is important. And I'm going to hit on something that I've been vocal about before, but I think it needs to be heard again, is that we need to make sure that our folks and our public safety agencies have the proper equipment to go out and start these fires. The quicker that we can get these fires stopped and under control and forward progress can be stopped, the better off we are. We don't lose homes, we don't lose property, we don't lose lives, people don't get hurt. And one of those tools that we have is an aviation unit. And we need support and we need more funding for that aviation unit. We do have a newer helicopter that came on not too many years in the past under the leadership of this department, the Firehawk, and that's a great addition. But I don't think a lot of people realize that we're using Vietnam-era helicopters to go out, and we're asking our folks to go out and fight these fires. And we're asking them to go out and do these rescues and make these evacuations during these floods and that type of stuff. And they do a great job on maintaining them. But again, if a 1968 fire engine or police car pulled up in front of your house, I don't think that a lot of people would go, that's acceptable. So I think, and look, these things cost money. They're expensive. But when we put it in the perspective of this, we have a lot of value in our properties. So if we go out and spend $4 or $5 million for a new Firehawk, right? Geez, I think they're probably a little more than that now. They're going up. But again, if we go make that investment in some of these tools to give to our first responders, some of these properties alone are worth $4 or $5 million. And we're seeing fires that are wiping out hundreds and hundreds of parcels. So I think the investment on that side is important for us as a community. Chief, and I know the sheriff's not here, but I'll say this to him as well. You guys keep bringing those things forward, and we as a community will support you guys and we'll make noise to make sure that those things get done. So I think it's important that when we put people in the air, that's already a risky business, that we give them good equipment to do that. We live in a county where we're fortunate enough to have funding to do some of these things, but we all have one pot that we pull from and we're fighting for it. So we need to look for that. We also have a county that we have folks that have some very exceptional financial capabilities, and they're very generous with those funds. So even if it's to the point where we need to look for private funds as well to support some of this stuff, we can do that, and we'll be happy to partner with the county to do that. We have our air operations that operate out of the airport here. The airport has made some investments in that airport specifically for fire suppression with the helitack pads and the helitack base. There's room to expand. We do need to expand our operations there, so I think that's really important. One of the other things that I want to bring up about this is not every agency in the state has the ability to fight fire at nighttime. And why that's such a big deal is that not every fire, but a lot of the times on these fires, the fires will lay down at night, and it gives our firefighters the opportunity to go make significant progress during the night. And when the morning comes, we get that weather back, or in the afternoon comes, we get that weather back, and the fire can get away from them. So the more that we can do at night with those night capabilities with that aircraft is a big deal. Our county, again, under this leadership of this fire department and the sheriff's department, they're one of the few agencies in the state that can actually go fight fires at night with helicopters. So I think that that's something we need to recognize and expand a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to make one more statement. I don't have a question. I'm just making an important statement here. And the one other thing that I'd like to ask is, we do have other resources in this community, to include our Chumash Fire Department folks. Chief, with the implementation of the Regional Fire Communications Center, I would ask that we potentially look at using them, putting them on a county card as well. I know when we call 911, I don't care if the fire engine's green, white, or red. So I think it's an excellent resource, and if we could look at that and explore that, it'd be much appreciated from a community standpoint. So I don't have a question. I apologize.
Oh. Come back to you. Anybody else? Question?
I live on Fredensburg Canyon, and we are a brand new Firewise community. We just got certification this month. I don't think she had that. But the question is, who has the lead on evacuation? The sheriffs or the fire? And who do we as a community plan with for that? Fire or police, or is it combined?
Well, the statutory responsibility is the sheriff's department, but practically the way that works is the first arriving chief officer, battalion chief typically, with the watch commander or the law enforcement in charge, get on together on a hood of a police car or a BC wagon, and they figure out where this fire's going. They map it. And then they start making warnings or evacuations, the likelihood that it's going to reach your community. So you're really going to get the notification from OEM, or Office of Emergency Management, upon the recommendation of the incident, the boots on the ground, who are saying, hey, this is the threat to this community. We either need to warn them or we need to order them evacuated. So statutory responsibility of the sheriff, both the sheriff and fire department. I know we work with both in our Firewise community. We did an evacuation drill, seemed kind of silly because we all just drove out the road and we met for a drink down at the... But again, it was a social aspect. We got to know each other better, and we were thinking about something we don't normally think about, which was, what is the second way out? So, but both your fire and sheriff's department will be able to help you on that.
So for us, for planning and bringing somebody out, should we contact the local fire station?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, just stop by the fire station, and you don't need to find the BC. They can find them for you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a question about, we have one road in and one road out of this town, and with the amount of building and new builds and condos and all the things that are going on now, I just don't get how it could possibly work. That we're all going to get out of here. I really don't get it. And maybe I'm being dumb about it, but, you know, I hadn't even thought about the livestock and the trailers and all that stuff. And you've got a fire truck that needs to get down the road. And then Miss Bessie, me, behind the wheel, wants to go too. And, you know, there is no way that we could accommodate in and out of this town we can't get out on the 4th of July. You know, I don't get it. I don't know. I mean, I'm loving all the plans and all that, but where's the infrastructure that's going to get us out of here?
Well, as the chief kind of alluded to, a lot of it's going to be early warning, early notification, and your self-awareness of what's happening locally, right? The county is just finishing up a countywide evacuation plan. There's in there, it points to challenges in local jurisdictions, but it also points to incidents that are more... You want to be careful because I don't want to be on the news saying this is going to happen, but incidents that have been historic that we can point to, like the Harris Fire in the Lompoc Valley, the Painted Cave Fire, Zeta fires, those areas where we have challenges, we've experienced challenges for evacuations. In this area, we've had the impacts of the Alisal Fire, we've had the impacts of the Lake Fire, the Zaka Fire. We've all driven, you know, Robbie, myself, the chief, Vince, we've driven around this community. I know it feels terrible when there's fires in this area, but when the fires are in the area, as the chief said, we take action by making that initial plan. Genesis is coming around. That's our new system for determining evacuations. It's going to be much faster to be able to have predetermined zones where you can press online, then Office of Emergency Management can then make their recommendations. But they're phased. So we don't try to get everyone out at one time. The Palisades fire had 7,000 households trying to get out. We don't have that. We don't have that density, that same density. But you do have quite a few more ways in and out of the area. But it's going to be phased. There'll be phased evacuations. If you have 100,000 people in the area, the Rose Bowl happening here, there'll be a challenge. As Chief said, the roads aren't built for that, for everyone to get out at one time. But, with the early warning and the technology we're putting in place and our knowledge of fires and evacuations now, I think we can get people, it's a lot less likely you're going to see those types of those areas. So I recognize my old boss as chunky.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. It is, and your question is super valid. So I had about 36 years in wildland fire. My first 10 years on a hotshot crew, and most of that time I was out in the middle of nowhere fighting fires that nobody in Santa Barbara County even knew where we were. And we would come back after a month of fighting fire, and our first stop was Cold Springs Tavern to have a beer, and people would say, "Where you been?" Like, "Oh, I've been on these wildland fires," and they just. This was a long period of time when Santa Barbara County was pretty sleepy with fire. And then 1990 Painted Cave fire woke everybody up. But then we kind of went back to sleep for a long time. And I think if you go from 1990, the Valley had a brief little episode with it, with the Maury fire in 93. How many people remember the Maury fire? It was kind of the carbon copy of the lake fire that you just experienced. Then we had a long sleepy period until 2004. We had the Gaviota fire. 2007, we had the Zaka fire, burned the entire backcountry. And then the South Coast just went through, a fire every year, practically. And it was just incredible to watch every single one of those fires do what they did and be part of it. I just randomly was part of most of those fires. And a big challenge was exactly what you asked. All of those fires involved some kind of evacuation scenario. Sometimes it was, hey, the fire's coming. So like the Thomas fire in 2017, the experience that Ventura City went through, which was an immediate fire burning 1,000 homes within 30 minutes of the fire starting, to what we dealt with, which was, hey, it's coming, and a week later, it finally showed up. So there's so many different scenarios, and you're absolutely correct. The infrastructure is not big enough to move all these people out. The evacuation study the county just did showed that in spades. And so, there's things we can do proactively, right? So there's these mitigation efforts that we're talking about. So we can do things as a society. We can do a lot better vegetation management on our roads. We can make that a priority. And why is that important? Because we see examples in a lot of cases where people are trapped on these roads. They're trying to get out. You want that place, that road, that corridor. That should be a safe corridor. And that's really about vegetation management. That's just being good and proactive at managing the vegetations on our public and private roadways. We can do as good a job as possible at what Chief Tan just alliterated. Okay, we're going to do an evacuation. Let's do it as deliberately and as efficiently as possible. And so the county's coming online with some new tools. They're going to have this new project called Genesis, which is going to create mapped zones, pre-mapped zones. The way we've done it up until now, and I've been part of this process, the chief described it perfectly, is that I would be at the back of my battalion chief vehicle with the sheriff, and we would look at a map and just draw, okay, we're going to evacuate these neighborhoods. And we would call dispatch and go, we need to evacuate everything from this street to this street. And then that's what would start the process. So it worked, but it takes a little time, right? And so we have all these tools that are going to help us get better, but at the end of the day, we have the road system that we have, and it was never designed. It's like, okay, another example, the hydrant system in the Palisades. It made a lot of media, a lot of national media about how that was the problem, but it really wasn't the problem. There's the little secret. No hydrant system in the United States of America was installed and designed to be a protection against wildland fire. It was designed for single structure fires, maybe a couple happening simultaneously. And so we have to work within those constraints, and I think that's where the mitigation side becomes so important. So I retired and I took off my fire suppression hat and put on my mitigation, hat, and I truly passionately believe that we can learn to live with wildland fire. And when you take steps to reduce risk, evacuation becomes less of an issue. There is a point sometime decades from now when wildland fire is no longer a disaster. It's no longer an emergency. It's similar to a weather event, and we can literally watch it and be entertained by it and be amazed by it, because it is an amazing phenomenon, I'll tell you. But it won't threaten our lives and property. But it's going to take a long time to get there, and it's a lot of collective action, a lot of effort and collective action. I firmly believe we'll get there someday, but everything we're doing right now is how we get to that place. And yes, helicopters are part of it for sure. Absolutely.
If I just might add, so roadways, 10-foot clearance, 13 and a half feet high, and we've allowed a lot of encroachments into the right-of-way. And so our Public Works Department is trying to push those back.
Yeah.
And on Alamo Pintado, where we have the trail, that's kind of where we started in the valley, to make that a thoroughfare and provide more ingress egress for
One last thing on this point, is this a good moment to also highlight, it could be commonly known, but are there communication tools or systems that the community can be registered in so that they're proactively aware they can anticipate a reverse 911 or look online for fire status or the zone sequencing status? What are those tools? Can we get you to mention those, please?
I think that's a softball, right? Because you can sign up for a Ready SBC right outside. So do that. We have such a small, and it was referred to earlier, we have such a small portion of the county that signed up for that. That's the best way. That comes straight from our Office of Emergency Management. That's a direct line to the information that's coming out. And then the Genesis project, some people heard it by Zone Haven. There's going to be a rollout of that. We're just now, it's very front and time consuming. We have to create the zones from Carpinteria all the way through Santa Maria, and then you're going to have an app on your phone. And as Fred said, it's going to be, for us in the field, it's literally going to be coloring by numbers. This zone, this zone, this zone is a warning. This zone is an immediate threat. It's an alert. And then you're going to get, depending on how you do the app settings on your phone, you will get a notice of 2 places where you reside and where your blue dot is. In other words, where you're located. So you can see exactly what warnings or orders affect those areas, and it's like getting an alert for anything else you have your alert set for on your cell phone, and that's coming this year. We're just now finishing up with all the local jurisdictions in the operational area, the maps, because that's the most important, to make sure the maps are correct for both flood and for fire.
And Chief, if there's no communications, radio?
Yeah, there's the AM radio, of course, and so and we've invested in that here. OEM has invested in our ability. If you don't have anything else, as Supervisor Hartman said, very often, in fact, some of us have the wind-up radios. If you don't have anything else, you have a way to get an AM radio channel, and that was Kelly Hubbard, the director of the Office of Emergency Management, who came up with the idea to let's at least make sure we have that radio system, or the AM radio system, available.
I just want to add on to that real quick, is your question exactly why we put together this event that we're hosting in May about evacuation survival, because everyone trying to evacuate Solvang one time, you can go what happened in Paradise, Palisades, people just get trapped in their cars. And so if that happens and you're trying to get out and you can't, what are some thought processes you can walk through to find a place around here that would be a safe, hopefully safe evacuation spot to kind of just hunker down, and it'll be very uncomfortable to live through that. But the goal is to live through it. And so that's exactly what Rob is talking about in May. So hopefully everyone who is available would like to attend, and that's what we walk people through.
What is the radio station? What is the AM radio station?
It's 5:30. 5:30 a.m.
Yeah, and we have some information. I know JD Saucedo is out with the Office of Emergency Management, and he's right outside. So make sure you're clear on what that is before you leave.
And our county fire public information officer, Scott Safechuck, is here. He can maybe shed some light on some of our social media outputs as well.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Maybe a lot of you don't do Twitter or X. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. Perfect. Can you hear me okay? All right, so how does the media get the information about the incident? They go through a public information officer, which is myself, or someone, if I'm out of town, someone would be working in my place. So you can get that information faster or at the same time that local media gets that. And on X, or Twitter, if you download that on your phone, you can see the information that I'm putting out to the media. So you get it at the same time that the media does it, such as evacuations. And that would be Scott Safechuck at SBC Fire Info. So SBC, like Santa Barbara County, Fire Info. And you can just put the @ symbol, at SBC Fire Info, and that'll take you to it. And then our relief PIO would be, this is a little more confusing, but it's at PIO SBC Fire Info. Most of our emergency messaging goes on the Twitter account so that it can be broadcasted out through local media. Our Facebook and or Instagram account would be more fire prevention information, stuff that we're talking about here tonight. And during fire season or leading up to fire season, we have a wildfire campaign that we do. It talks about the 6 Ps and prevention, evacuation, home hardening, a lot of the stuff in the brochure that you received tonight for Ready Set Go. Thank you.
JD, could you just give us a quick on the radio? Thank you, Scott.
We had, Chief, there was one question over.
You have a name no one can forget on this topic.
Oh.
He's going to follow you.
All right, thank you.
The supervisor asked just about the radio program, if you just had a few words on that. Somebody was asking what the station is and then how.
Absolutely. Thank you. JD Saucedo, Emergency Manager with the County of Santa Barbara's Office of Emergency Management. Good evening, and thank you all for being here. Yes, that radio station is AM 530 for you to be able to tune into. This is a brand new system that we're getting off the ground, so that will be a system in which we will have emergency preparedness information playing during blue skies when nothing bad is happening, and then during an emergency, we would change that message with whatever information is appropriate at the time to be able to release for you. So that's kind of the general high-level 30,000-foot view of how that would be done. I also want to say that we have a flyer here just outside the store that kind of goes into more detail about the question that was asked. What are the different ways you can be informed during an emergency? And so this does dive in a little bit into Ready SBC, but it also goes into a lot of other details about other sources of information that you can have to reliably be able to turn to during an emergency. And finally, if I can just have one more thing on my soapbox, and that is during a significant emergency, the county will establish a incident webpage on readysbc.org. That is your one-stop, countywide, significant emergency, reliable source of information. There's a lot of information that flies out there during an emergency. A lot of people think they know better. A lot of people are trying to do good, and we understand that. But readysbc.org is the official, validated information from the first responders in the field that are making decisions that are appropriate and actionable for you to take. So I would strongly recommend bookmarking readysbc.org. That's where you sign up for your alerts, and it's where you can turn to when blue skies turn gray. And thank you all for your time.
I just want to say I saw the livestock registry on the website, on your the Animal Services website. I saw that today. Maybe a question for Anne Marie. Can you, with fire safe certified communities, as an example, like Sabata Canyon, can you describe how, like the plans for livestock evacuation in one of those scenarios, I guess, in that plan?
Yeah, so we work with the community, so that's a concern for your community. We'd include that in the action plan, and maybe it would be something like connect with, John, what's the North County version for SIM?
Forest Emergency Evacuation.
Yes, that group. Next, maybe we connect with them to host a practice evacuation. And then the next step would be, all right, let's reach out to them, schedule a date with the community to do a live evacuation practice. So it's really more about recognizing what the concerns are, adding them in the action plan, and then we work with you and to help kind of make that come true. So it really depends on each community. As you know, every community is different, unique. And so what we did with Spotted Canyon was we brought in that group, and they worked with the local neighbors on making a plan. We identified, we had it on a map for their community, every single home that had large animals. So everyone knew, got everyone's phone numbers written down. So if anyone needed help, they had everyone's contact information. We also wrote down if people had enough trailers or not to get the livestock out. So kind of made a plan starting like that, but it always depends what's happening at the time. So recognizing people need to be adaptive and flexible. Starting out with information like that is super valuable, and then getting to do a training was the next step that we did with them, and we can keep adding on to that as we go.
This is probably a question for you, Joan. So when we did have that fire out on 246 and we lost cell phones, internet, phones, any kind of way, I was actually stuck on the pass with my car broken down. You couldn't call AAA, couldn't do anything. So I'm wondering if there's a plan for any kind of cell redundancy in case one of the cell towers does go down, or the fiber as it did on that fire.
We are working not so much for the general public, but we're investing quite heavily in a public public safety radio network. And so we have a lot of dead spaces in our county, and this will allow the emergency responders to be able to communicate better. But that's something we should be looking into more, is how we get greater redundancy. We're working really hard on broadband and trying to get more fiber optic cable buried, and that's more fire resistant, but it's a long process, and the money that was coming from the federal and the state government got cut back quite a bit. So but I will start talking this up and about fire resistance with the various providers and see what additional suggestions they might have. So thank you for the question. All of us is smarter than any one of us.
And I'll take the last softball for you, since we are at 2 hours coming up for it. I just wanted to say, information is kind of like a wine tasting. Sometimes you want to revisit it at the end of this situation. So I wanted to know, as a takeaway for those who are here in the audience or who are watching online, if you have your one action item you'd like everyone to take away from it, if it would make your life easier and you'd have less anxiety at night, what is the thing you'd want everyone to do or advocate for as they leave today? And if you want to just do it as a round-robin turntable, that'd be great as your kind of summary moment.
I'll start, and it's a reiteration of one of my messages, which is ready, set, go. Doesn't mean wait to go. It means you go when you feel like you should go.
I know today we weren't talking about home hardening and fenceless space, but to really avoid the conflagrations that are happening in Paradise and Palisades, Eaton, Lahaina, is to really focus on protecting your home from embers. So removing your mulch right up against your house and upgrading your vent mesh to at least 1/8 inch will make a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this county has a very high IQ when it comes to wildland fire. I mean, it's just because it's covered with wildland fire history. Rob earlier mentioned the word lulled, right? The Zaka fire was frightening for the front country for a brief period, but then it lived back here for 2 or 3 months, right? And everyone in the valley saw it and was like, okay, got a little complacent, like, hey, this big fire's not coming in, this big fire's not coming in. But we actually all know, like, fires just occur, right? So I think one of the things, we've all touched on it, if everyone can do their defensible space, work on your defensible space, slowly work on your zone 0 when it's not totally law yet, but except for new construction. And then if you have a private road, keep working on those private roads, because that's going to allow us to come in and you guys to come out. So
you picked all the good ones. So I think one thing that that kind of stood out that bothered me during the Palisades was that there was all this kind of weird stuff going on in the national media about what caused it and who was at fault. And I ended up doing a podcast where I actually called it Myth Busting the Palisades Fire. Some of the things that were bothering me about all the conjecture and peanut gallery stuff. There's so much information out there right now about the science of wildfire, information and educational material where you can read, just volumes, and you can go to websites that lay it out really succinctly and take the complexities out of a lot of this. I think that's what I'd love to see is wildfire become something that we educate ourselves about. It's one of the things the Fire Safe Council is trying to do is create some educational programs, even down into the grade school, to teach our children about what wildfires are about. It's a pretty impactful thing in at least half of our country, right? Everything west of the Mississippi River, all those states are experiencing wildfire to a greater or lesser degree. And now, of course, we're seeing it even on the East Coast and in the South. And so it's something that we should all be knowledgeable about and take just a little bit of time to find something to read or go to a website to learn about it. It's not all bad. Wildfire has an important role to play in our ecology. And so the steps we take, everything that everyone up here has talked about, allows us to find a safer way to live with fire and not be continuously terrified by it and actually sort of appreciate what it does to the natural environment.
I don't love going last. Good. My one piece would be if you have a large animal, go out at night and load it into a trailer and figure out how you're going to get out. Most of the time, your animals are used to loading, maybe during the day, everything's peaceful and quiet. Disaster occurs at any time. If you can safely load and get out of your property at night in the dark, your chances of getting out in the daylight are much greater, and you'll have some understanding of what it might be like under very smoky or hazy conditions, wet conditions, anything like that, what lights you might need, access challenges, etc.
My agenda was clear from the start. I have a sign-up list for anybody who might be interested in working on a community wildfire protection plan for the Valley. We also have another list if you just want us to give you more information. But basically, if you're not a Firewise community, get in touch with Anne Marie and hold a party in your neighborhood. It's the best thing to invite people over for a glass of wine and start talking about these issues. It's amazing how it really does start to create community and start creating plans for action. And it's a lot of fun, and it creates... we're suffering from an epidemic of loneliness. And so this is one way that people will get out of their homes and come together and think about how to work together to make the neighborhood better. So I think that's what we all want to do, is make our neighborhoods better. So thank you. And I think it's been terrific. I mean, you see you've got the creme de la creme here tonight, talking to the Valley, and so I really appreciate everyone who came. Thank you all.